In order to consider the general idea of civilization, I thought it'd be fun, and I put the information in the blog for the course. The consideration of Arnold Toynbee, who used to be quite popular, and his works are all over the place in library sales. You'll find copies of the abridgments of his study of history. His general view of history as being something that follows a sort of law-like process, kind of a scientific, that you can do kind of a scientific history, has sort of gone by the wayside. But nonetheless, there are aspects of his analysis that I've always found strangely compelling and certainly worth thinking about, even if they're perhaps too general to be terribly applicable. But nonetheless, they're worth considering. So, for starters, let's just talk about Arnold Toynbee's study of history for a little while as we contemplate what civilization is. Because Toynbee's initial his unit of analysis is a civilization. Now, he does consider a unit above civilizations, which he calls the universal churches: Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam. Toynbee ultimately sees the highest form of human community in an ecumenical brotherhood of all of the world religions. Okay. And as far as the genesis of civilizations, the origins of civilizations, Toynbee primarily sees the emergence of six important civilizations across the world in Neolithic society, including the ones that we're studying: Sumer, Egypt, and so forth. Um, and he basically creates a model that is best summarized as challenge and response. The best way to understand this is to take a set of people existing in a particular location. They're faced with a challenge of some sort, and the only solution is a civilizing innovation. There are several sorts of challenges. For example, like the ones that we're faced with in Sumer and Egypt are largely faced with the challenge of recovering flooded land, dealing with recurrent flooding of river systems. The solution resulted in the emergence of the first civilization, Sumer, which was a hierarchical city-state run by a priestly elite who had developed writing. Similar challenges face other kinds of people. There are other kinds of challenges. There's a challenge of physical force exerted against the community from the outside, attacks, whatever, like we'll see with the Persian attack on the Greeks, and also penalties imposed on a particular community, like oppression. We think particularly, say, of the Jews, the enormous success of the Jewish people in the face of oppression within a larger society, and the degree to which they're able to lead to breakthroughs in civilizational progress. It's important that the challenge of the challenge and response is not too great. If it's too great, then it can destroy the culture. If it's not strong enough, it can lead to stagnation. If you can get everything you want without civilization, why go to trouble? You know, um, every response to a challenge in turn invokes another challenge. Every time a challenge is successfully met, it builds confidence and staying power within that civilization, and gives it momentum to carry it through to the next challenge. Okay, the growth of civilizations. We've got the genesis of civilizations and challenge and response to problems that lead to civilizing innovation. The growth and success of a civilization comes primarily from groups of individuals, and particularly Toynbee sees these as a creative minority. The mechanism creative individuals use is that of withdrawal and return. One can perhaps think here in particular, say, of the Hebrew prophets. Individuals withdraw from society with the goal of personal enlightenment or to solve a philosophical riddle or problem. You think of the founders of the great religions, Siddhartha, and so forth. Or, as I say, the Hebrew prophets: the individual achieves enlightenment and then returns to the society to convert the rest of the people to their vision. The conversion is carried out by way of mimesis, M-I-M-E-S-I-S, which is basically a Greek term which we can define loosely as imitation or drill, in other words, repetition of a model, drill. Very few people are sustaining the same degree of enlightenment of the creative individual or individuals, but mass numbers of people can be taught to ritually imitate certain acts of drill. Think of profound religious insight, and then it gets formalized in the rituals of a religion, and then thousands and thousands of people can participate in the ritualized form of that religion, and participate in the enlightenment of the original individual. As long as those acts prove efficacious in some way for these people of spiritual life, they'll continue to do them. As a society grows, it's accompanied by further social differentiation. Different elements within the society achieve different levels of commitments to the teaching of the creative minority. Okay, so breakdown of civilizations. First, the transformation among the creative minority occurs over time. At some point, they cease to be creative, and they become just merely a dominant minority. You can think here of, say, monks in the Middle Ages becoming landlords as opposed and losing some of their spiritual cachet. Second, the majority of the society withdraws its allegiance from the dominant minority in the society itself. Uh, what Okay, and they may cease to engage in the ritualistic activities. They cease to participate in mimesis that were taught by the once creative minority who are now merely the dominant minority. These processes in turn lead to a decline in social unity. There's no longer a sense of a common project shared by all the members of the society. Um, Social differentiation is associated with the development of particular allegiances as opposed to allegiance to the social order as overall. Um, what causes creative minorities to become merely dominant minorities? Um, Ritual becomes just a mechanical external process. It's no longer internalized. Um, the creative minority may become in the in the efforts to preserve outdated institutions or techniques that are that are failing, and they're failing to see that the old techniques no longer work, and they just kind of stick to tradition without any realization of the loss of devotion. And thirdly, militarism also leads to stagnation. As a dominant minority becomes more militaristic, it ceases to be innovative and becomes increasingly protective of the status quo. And the more victories a dominant minority achieves, the more stagnant and set in its ways it becomes. You might think here of the fate of Sparta, which we'll see in Greece. Creative minorities always generate into dominant minorities over time, as they're unable to maintain the creativity of the founding fathers, so to speak. We should expect to see the emergence of new creative minorities as circumstances and civilizations change, but the dominant majority will always resist the emergence of new creative minorities. Um, as the followers of the dominant minority become disaffected, they become what Toynbee refers to with a sort of Marxian term as a proletariat. They basically secede from their own civilization. Um, Following a breakdown of civilization, there's a process of disintegration, and the civilization split into three crucial components. First is the dominant minority, which we already talked about. Second is what Toynbee refers to as an internal proletariat, which is a disaffected majority no longer willing to follow the drill of the dominant minority. And third is an external proletariat, maybe barbarians who live at the borders of civilization, who, as long as the dominant minority was creative and influential, were engaged in mimesis themselves and wanted to participate in that culture. But once it starts to break down and is rejected by its own majority, they basically come to have nothing but contempt for the culture that they've been to some extent parasitic on. Each of these groups produces different institutions during the process of disintegration. The dominant minority responds to breakdown by rallying around universal states. They create a new sense of order by enlarging the domain of government by creating empires. The internal proletariat produces universal churches such as Christianity within the Roman Empire. The external proletariat uh, no longer want to be part of the civilization. They become barbarian war bands. You might think of Visigoths, Mongols, etc. The only way to avoid disintegration once it has become is through petrifaction. The civilization basically has to stop its development and become stagnant and force a kind of stasis. We think of Egypt, the New Kingdom following the Hyksos and the innovations of Akhenaten. Characteristics of societies in disintegration. Disintegrating societies will see the development of a wide variety of alternative lifestyles. You'll find people dropping out and engaging in either decadent lifestyles or extreme, denial and asceticism. So basically, you'll see, you know, uh, complete decadence on the one hand, sexual perversion, extremes of decadent behavior on the one hand. On the other hand, you'll see people withdrawing from culture to become ascetics, monks, etc., hermits. Um, Disintegration also typically follows a time of troubles, and the only way to put off disintegration is through periodic rallies in the universal state. It typically takes hundreds of years for civilization to disintegrate, and typically the civilization will go through a rally and a crisis, and a rally and then a crisis again, and finally it will collapse. The universal state is one of the key responses to the challenge of disintegration and troubled times. Um, the time of troubles within a civilization may take the form of a civil war, such as the Peloponnesian War in the Hellenic world between Sparta and Athens. Universal states are tragic, according to Toynbee, in that they always ultimately fail, but they do facilitate a higher purpose, and that they create institutions that enable the growth of the higher religions of the internal proletariat. Um, they also develop a common language across the empire, facilitating communication. One thinks of the development of roads in the Roman Empire that facilitated the spread of Christianity. And the universal churches that grow within the disintegrating empires serve as bridges between affiliated civilizations. What Toynbee means by affiliated civilizations are civilizations that stand in relation to one another as a parent to child. For example, Christianity preserved, say, elements of the Roman Empire and of the Greek legacy to hand on to an emerging Western civilization that would come out of it. Universal churches also have a higher function in creating a unique species of society based on purely spiritual and voluntary submission, with all devoted to a common purpose. There are dangers that face any universal church, the greatest of which is ecclesiastical militancy, in which the church loses its spiritual and voluntary aspect and becomes a dominating force. In such cases, it may lead to a breakup of affiliated civilizations, such as, I guess we could suppose, we could see maybe the Reformation, the division into Protestant and Catholic Europe as an example of this. Okay, well, so much for Toynbee. Let's see what you